They are supposed to feel loved, protected. They are supposed to feel safe. But 1 out of 3 and 1 out of every 6 will feel none of those things.
My first memory was when I was 5. This went on for nearly a decade.
We're talking about childhood sexual abuse with speaker, author, and survivor Nicole Bromley.
So many people are affected by the silence. You know, we feel like we have to keep it a secret.
Today on Joni, the victims find their voice. Next.
It is the ugliest and most horrible of secrets, and it is running rampant in our country today. It devastates countless lives. 1 out of every 3 girls and 1 out of every 6 boys suffer from this nightmare quietly. But today, their voices will be heard. We are talking about childhood sexual abuse with a woman who carried the pain and torment of her past with her until she could keep silent no more. Her revealing book, Hush, is bringing this evil into the light, from who it affects to the pain it causes, to the misconceptions, and more importantly, how to empower victims to move from silence to healing. This is an important program, so I want to get right into it. Please welcome speaker and founder of One Voice Enterprises and survivor, Nicole Bromley. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and sharing. You look so young, but I know that you're married and you've got a little one. How old are you?
I'm 29, I know.
You're 29?
I know.
Wow.
Yes.
She looks like she's 18.
I've heard
maybe.
it before. I've heard
That's
that
good.
before.
So see, when you get 39, you'll look 20, right?
I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for writing this book. What an appropriate title, Hush. Moving from silence to healing after childhood sexual abuse. You know, when I was looking through your book, one of the things you said is that you're often asked, do you get tired of speaking out and sharing your story? And you said, in reality, I really don't, because as I begin to share, it sheds the light on something and I'm able to help other people. What about that?
Well, it's so true. I mean, there's so many people out there who have this secret and they're waiting for someone else to share their story. And I realized that when I use my voice to speak out, others can then say me too. And it brings so much freedom. And so each time empowers me to continue.
Well, let's go back and talk about your early experience with childhood sexual abuse. When did it start? Tell us a little bit about your family and growing up.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a small town. Everyone who knew me considered me the perfect girl from the perfect family. My stepfather came into my life when I was 3 years old. My first memory of being sexually abused was when I was 5. This went on for nearly a decade. I was 14 years old when I finally found the courage to tell my mom.
Well, let's go back a little bit. So now, what is your first memory at 5? What happened?
I can remember being in my bedroom, and it was the early morning hours, waking up and just feeling like my stepfather had been in my room, and I remembered that I felt really uncomfortable, like I had been touched and I didn't understand what was going on. And that led to things later of certain playing games and tickle games where then I would just be touched and it would just make me feel awkward. But no one ever talked about these things. I didn't know it was wrong. And my stepfather told me that, you know, that this is what good dads do for their special daughters, and this is him teaching me. Eventually led him showing me pornographic films, and you know, this was a way that a dad teaches their kids, and I just couldn't talk about it to other people, so it was very confusing for a little girl.
Well, I'm sure it must have been very confusing. When did it lead into him actually abusing you sexually, and how did you feel after that experience?
Well, first of all, I think people should understand sexual abuse isn't just touches, it's words or looks or, you know, showing inappropriate movies. So if that's happened to someone, to really understand that that is sexual abuse. And
so all of those things fall under the title of
Exactly.
sexual abuse, not just what we would say intercourse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's very freeing for people to understand that, to be able to label what happened to them as wrong. It was sexual abuse, and there's healing for them too. For me, I did also experience the touching, and it was very difficult for me. very confusing. Especially as a little girl, not understanding why my body would respond to touches in that way. And that caused me to feel a lot of shame as a little girl. Even growing up into adulthood, working through the shame and guilt of why would my body respond to my stepfather's touch in that way. It was hard.
So the question I have, I think that probably the audience has as well, is did your mom, how could she have missed this if you said it went on a decade? What was he that sneaky in how he was able to pull it off, and again to the point that you wouldn't say anything about it?
Yeah, then that is a good question. My mom struggled with the same guilt for a very, very long time. Hindsight's 20/20. Looking back, she would say, how did I miss these signs? And I think that abusers are very good at what they do. They not only brainwash the child, their victim, but everyone in the circle to keep that secret. And my stepfather was very good at that, very manipulative of my mother, and abusive of her too.
And so what kind of things would he say to you to make you be quiet?
He would say things like, if you ever tell anyone, you'll never see your mother again. You'll have to live with another family. He said no one would ever believe me because I was just a little girl. He was a very popular man in our town, that everyone would believe him and take his side. He told me he would kill my dog if I ever told anyone.
So on the outside, he portrayed this perfect fatherly image, and it would have been hard for the community to believe he was engaging in
exactly, and not just him himself, but our whole family was revered in such a way. Growing up, I was homecoming queen, I was student council president, straight A student, teacher's pet, I was involved in all sports. So, everyone looked at our family like we had it all together. So the image was there. It was a very good cover-up for what he was doing at home.
Tell us about how you told your mom.
Well, we were in the car, and we were driving, and my mom had shared with me some things about my stepfather that were confusing for her. She wanted to go back to college. He became very angry, violent, acting in ways he never had before. Then she turned to me and said, has he been acting strange around you? And it was then that everything had been coming to a head for me. A lot of molestation had just occurred on a family vacation a week prior. I was fed up. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want this happening anymore. And when my mom shared with me her heart and asked me that question, I felt like that was my time. And so I hinted at the fact, he had been acting strange. And then she looked at me, and it was almost as if she knew in that moment, like the Holy Spirit was there. She said, has he ever touched you? And then I said, yes. She slammed on the brakes, pulled the car over to the side of the road, and for the first time in my life, I knew that it was wrong. And
wow. And what did she say to you?
Well, she started crying, and she said, I don't know what we're going to do, but don't worry, I'm going to take care of this.
And didn't she say, I am so sorry this has happened to you?
Yes.
And you needed to hear that.
I did, and I needed to hear that it wasn't my fault, because for so long I really held that it was my fault, and I carried that shame. And I continued to for quite some time. I needed to work that out with God, but I needed to hear from my mom that it wasn't my fault.
And so let's go fast forward just a little bit to children's camp, youth camp. What happened?
Right.
This was really something that you did.
Well, I went to camp. I had never told anyone. My best friend didn't even know this a whole year later about what had happened to me. And I went to camp, and the last day of camp, they had this open mic time. You could come up and share a verse or something that happened that week, or your testimony, or your crush of the week, whatever you wanted to talk about. I went up and I told my story for the first time, and I went home from camp.
And what did you say?
I don't even remember. All I remember was getting in front of that microphone and telling the truth of what I'd been through, and the fact that after I told my stepfather committed suicide. And I know that was something I was really dealing with at the time, so I know I shared about that, but the truth of why he had done that. Many of my friends knew that my stepfather was no longer alive, but they didn't know why. And
so was there like complete and utter silence?
Yeah, I felt
as you began
crazy.
to tell these kids
Yes.
what you had been through?
Yes, and I remember walking away and thinking, what did I just do? I mean, my friends from school and youth camper here. And but when I went home from camp, I started receiving letters and letters from other kids at that camp telling me their story for the first time. And at 15 years old, God was using me to write back and forth with these other kids and to help them find freedom and healing, to tell their parents, all these things. And I remember opening my Bible that week and coming to 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4, and talks about how God comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others in any trouble with that same comfort we've received from God. And that was so evident to me that there was more to my life than the suffering. God was going to use it for good.